Hey guys, what's up? My name is Sky Webb and I'm here to talk about a true crime story that I cannot get off my mind. But before I get started, I just want to put out a little disclaimer that I mean no harm to any of the victims or the victims' families, and I wish everyone who was hurt within this story the utmost peace and solace, and rest in recovery. I forgot my intro for a second there. With that out of the way, happy True Crime Thursday. Welcome back, or just welcome if you've never been here before. If you are new here, make sure you go and subscribe so that you can see my head every single Thursday when I talk all about true crime. For this week's video, I have to give another little warning that it does involve the death of children. Again, I'm sorry, my bad. Please suggest cases that don't involve children because I really need to get away from the whole children murder thing that I've been stuck on. Sorry, I apologize. Alright, I'll get into it now. This is the Andrea Yates case. Andrea Yates was born in 1964 in Hallsville, Texas, and she was the youngest of 5 children. Her mum had a German background and she was a German immigrant, and her dad had Irish immigrant parents, so his background was Irish, and she had a huge respect for her parents. Growing up, she believed that family was really, really important, and she often prioritized family over other things. So when all her friends were going through that like 12 to 14-year-old, like parents are gross, parents are icky type of stage, she still thought her parents were like the bomb.com. Like she still prioritized them over her friends and her social life and everything else. Growing up wasn't the easiest for Andrea though. She suffered from an array of different mental illnesses and mental struggles that she had to battle with throughout her adolescent life. She struggled with eating disorders and body image in particular, and then when she was 16 and 17 she developed really bad depression, so she would often express suicidal thoughts. She would show like suicidal tendencies, and she would say this stuff to her friends, which she actually had loads of. She had so many friends and they were all really, really helpful. They tried to help her through it and they were successful for the most part in like helping her cope. And despite suffering from all of these horrific things at such a young age, it actually didn't impact her schooling at all. She had really, really good grades. She was a great student. She participated in a number of extracurriculum activities, and she was even the class valedictorian. From there, she went on to university to study to be a nurse, and she worked as a registered nurse for 8 years. In 1989, she met her husband Rusty, and by 1993, they were married, living together, and really happy. The following year, they had their first son called Noah, and he was beautiful. And right before Noah was born, Rusty actually took a new job in Florida, which led to them purchasing a small trailer to live in, just the 3 of them. Now, all of Andrea's friends and family, they sort of assumed that after having Noah, she would get back into doing what she loved, which was striving for excellence. As I said, she had really good grades, and that was something that was very important to her. Education was important to her. Excellence was important to her. Like, she loved to be in the workforce. She loved to get an education. She loved to get good grades. She loved to strive for excellence in all of these areas. So they all kind of assumed she would just get straight back into nursing or get straight back into the workforce after having Noah, but they were super surprised when she decided, actually, no, I'm gonna be a full-time mum now. So she became a full-time mum, and within the next 3 years, she had 2 more sons to add to her motherly duties, John and Paul. And right before Paul was born, they actually moved back to Houston. So they were now in Texas, and they bought a motorhome to live in. So they actually downsized despite having 2 more kids. So now back in Houston, it was Andrea, Rusty, Noah, Paul, and John. All 5 of them living in a motorhome. So it was very close quarters. But both Rusty and Andrea proclaimed and told everybody that they would have as many babies as nature would allow. So they definitely shared this goal of procreating and for Andrea to be a full-time mum and, raise all these bloody flocks of children. And if you ask Rusty why Andrea was the one to stay home, why it was sort of her priorities that seemed to have changed, he would just say, well, she fell in love. She was in love with the children. She fell in love with being a mother, and she wanted to do the best job that she could at being a mother, which sort of does make sense. If she was striving for excellence in everything she did, it would make sense that she would want to be the best mum that she could be. But everyone still was like, it seemed different for Andrea. But Rusty, he stuck with the story. No, she fell in love, and we decided we want to have this traditional family dynamic, you know? And they did live by a very strict religious belief at this point. It was sort of like a subdivision of a religion. It was sort of like it was a little cultesque, like a little culty, you know. It was like one guy that was a preacher, and he sort of preached his religion, and then they sort of took in what he said, and you know what I mean? But they were very strict about it, and they were very, very religious, and they took what he said very seriously. So that may have had a big impact on her decision to stay home. And Andrea stuck by the same story, that she just fell in love and this is what she wanted to do now, and she wanted her friends and family to sort of accept that. Not that they didn't accept that, but they just kind of questioned it. And she didn't confide in her friends and family how she really felt about the situation. She didn't admit that she might have been having some struggles, but she did confide in a psychiatrist. So she did get to, you know, express her feelings at least to this lady, and this lady has done a lot of interviews expressing exactly what Andrea was thinking and feeling at this time.
She had thoughts or visions of a knife and had thoughts about stabbing someone in blood. She thought she heard Satan speak to her after the birth of Noah.
And by now she had 3 boys. So those visions weren't getting any better. That sort of violent imagery wasn't getting any better. And so her psychiatrist recommended and told her, I don't think you should be having any more children. I don't think it's good for your mental health. And I think that if you have any more kids, it could seriously be dangerous. She was fearful that it would bring on a depressive or psychotic episode. Andrea went against that advice though, and she went on to have another son called Luke. And about 4 or 5 months after Luke was born, Rusty came home to find Andrea having the first of many, many episodes that she actually shared with him. This wasn't the first for her, but for Rusty, it was the first time seeing it. He came home and found her just sort of rocking back and forth and chewing her fingertips, like actually gnawing at the skin of her fingertips. And she just said to him, like, I need help, which was kind of great because it was the first time she admitted to someone outside of like her and her therapist that she needed help and that she was having struggles. And Rusty tried to help her in his own way, but to him, he didn't understand the severity of the situation, because to him, this was the first episode he'd ever seen. But to Andrea, this was probably the 10th that week, you know what I mean? So Rusty just packed up the kids and took Andrea and went and stayed at her parents' house. And the very next day, June 1999, Andrea tried to commit suicide by overdosing on her dad's sleeping pills. And this blew Andrea's family away. They were so shocked by this because she was very good at hiding her emotions and her feelings, and she didn't share that she was having these thoughts like she did when she was younger. She didn't share that she was having struggles or hardships in parenthood or in motherhood or in any aspect of her life. So when this happened, they were just like so taken aback, and they thought something really bad must have happened to her to affect her mental health like this and to make her weak.
Because she's very, very strong, so something must have really weakened her at some point to where she actually did attempt suicide.
So they took her to hospital and they took care of her, and then they sent her to a psychiatric unit where she was put on antidepressants. She was released from this psychiatric unit prematurely due to her insurance running out, so she wasn't actually of sound mind in a lot of professionals' opinions, but she was released, and then she was actually referred on to a different psychiatrist who then changed her medication from Zoloft to Zyprexa, which is actually a drug designed to help people with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. But as I mentioned, Andrea was very religious and she followed a very strict religious belief, and as a part of this religious belief, medications were evil, medications were bad, and she didn't want to put that evil substance into her body, so she wasn't very good at sticking to her medication. She didn't take it regularly she didn't really want to take it at all. So she would do whatever she could to get rid of these pills and make it seem like everything was fine. So she would flush the pills, she would hide them, in her mouth when people were checking that she had taken them. Like, she would just lie about it and try and get rid of them however she could. And so when she was released from the psychiatric unit, she spent time at her motorhome part-time and then spent time at her parents' house part-time. She would go back and forth because her mum and Rusty sort of felt like it would be better for her mental health to take a break from the motorhome, because it was obviously so small and they were so cooped up with so many of them in there. They just felt like it would be better for her to have a little bit more room to like chill, you know what I mean? But she continued to get worse, most likely because she wasn't on any medication because it was evil and she couldn't fill her body with evil. So she would have a lot more episodes and she started to hurt herself. She would pull her hair out in like stress fits. She was scratching herself. She was taking chunks out of her skin from digging her nails too deep. And then she started having these violent visions again, but they were getting worse. So these visions that Andrea had, they were actually hallucinations, and she would have both visual and audio hallucinations, but the ones that she recalled being the worst were these audio hallucinations where she was told to get a knife and she was told by these voices to hurt someone. And this led to a really, really bad episode with Rusty where she did end up getting a knife.
She's having a vision that says, get a knife, get a knife, get a knife, get a knife, get a knife. So she ran and got a steak knife from her mother's house, goes into the bathroom, and is holding it to her neck. When Rusty comes in, she's saying, get back, let me do it, please let me do it.
Thankfully, Rusty was able to get the knife off her and they were able to rush her to hospital where she was given emergency sedation and medication and, you know, taken care of. And then she started to admit to her nurses that she was terrified that she might hurt someone, and that's why she did it, because she was so scared she would rather hurt herself than to hurt someone else. And at this point, the nurses could see she actually had big, long claw marks up and down her legs where she had dug her nails into her skin so deeply, trying to hold herself back because she was so scared she was going to hurt her children, which is terrifying. And it was here where she was prescribed the drug Haldol, and it worked really, really well for her. She was prescribed that after she was allowed to leave the psychiatric unit, and she went home and she actually stuck to taking it for a little bit and she started to make progression, and it was really good. Like it's like a miracle, like it actually helped. And this time after the release, they actually moved into a small house. Her, Rusty and the kids moved into a house because Rusty and mainly Andrew's mum was like, get the fuck out of those small little motorhomes and please get a house for my daughter because she can't be cooped up anymore. But Rusty agreed, so they finally got a house. So now they have a house, now she's on medication, she's doing well, there's no more hallucinations, there's no more vision, she's not feeling angry, she's not feeling violent, she's not cooped up anymore, like they are on the right track, her kids are growing up, everybody's happy. And then 7 weeks, I mean it's approximate, but still 7 weeks after leaving the hospital and moving into the new house, Andrea falls pregnant with her 5th child. Another fucking child, against literally every single doctor, nurse, psychologist, psychiatrist, every person she has ever spoken to, against their wishes and recommendations. And like, it's bad for you don't have any more kids. She still had another kid. But I mean, Andrew's not really necessarily to blame. It was sort of Rusty who wanted all these kids, which I mean, like, duh, it was Rusty who wanted these kids. Obviously, Andrea didn't want them because she was struggling. But Rusty basically said, I know she could get sick again. We know there's a chance she could get sick again. But if she does get sick again, we'll just take care of it. Like, we'll just treat her and then go back to our lives. Like, he really didn't care that she would get fucked up again.
Rusty explained this as if you were given a brand new Mercedes-Benz and said, here it is for free. But if you take this Mercedes-Benz, you're going to have the flu for 2 weeks. Would you do it? He said, of course. Andrea might get sick, but we knew there were medicines out there that could help.
So Andrea stopped taking Haldol that sounds seriously like a goblin or something. I don't even know if I'm saying it right. But she stopped taking the medication in March of 2000 so that it wouldn't affect the pregnancy. And then she gave birth to her first daughter, Mary, in November of 2000. In March of 2001, though, Andrea's father passed away, and this had a massive impact on her mental health. This definitely took her a couple leaps backwards from any progress that she had made. She really didn't cope well with this news. She didn't really know how to cope with it. And Rusty started noticing all of the sort of warning signs that she wasn't doing so good anymore. She was getting bald patches again, and he knew that was from her pulling out her hair. She had scratches all over herself again, and this time it got even worse. She started really mutilating herself, and this time she completely stopped feeding Mary at all. So it was starting to get like serious in terms of the children as well. So Rusty took her to hospital, and again she was admitted, and this time she was under the care of Dr. Muhammad Saeed, and he treated her, medicated her, and then released her. But he didn't just release her like everyone else did. He released her with a set of like rules and recommendations and restrictions and guidelines to help her recover and help her like progress, you know what I mean? And this was in April of 2001, but then in May of 2001, Andrea was rehospitalized after a scheduled doctor appointment with Dr. Saeed. He readmitted her because he said that she was in a near catatonic state. And then he came to the conclusion that she was suicidal again, because she told him that the day previous to this appointment that she filled up the bathtub, and that was not usual for her. This wasn't part of her like duty anymore. She wasn't supposed to be having baths or giving their children baths. So he felt like this was like a suicidal thing. So again, Dr. Saeed released her after treating her and making sure she was on her medications and whatever, and again gave a strict like guidelines and rules and restrictions list to both her and Rusty. And the main sort of rule was that Andrea needs to be watched and supervised at all times. She's not in a state where she can be alone. She's not in an independent state. She shouldn't be looking after the children. She shouldn't be doing any of that. She needs to be supervised at all times. She was supposed to be watched around the clock until further notice if Dr. Saeed noticed progress, and then he would obviously like readjust all these rules. Rusty chose not to honor those rules though. He decided that it would be better for Andrea to have time alone so that she could become a little bit independent. So he decided that he would leave for work a little bit earlier and have his mum arrive, who was the person supposed to supervise her on certain days, have her arrive a little bit later. So he planned to give Andrea an hour by herself in the morning and an hour by herself at night, where he would come home later and have the mum leave earlier. I'm not sure whether the mum knew that this was happening or whether she thought he had just left and was just about to arrive, that type of thing. I'm not sure, but this was Rusty's decision to give her more independence against the wishes of Dr. Saeed. So on the 20th of June, Rusty left for work an hour before his mum was supposed to come home to look after Andrea. So he left Andrea and the 5 kids home alone for that hour. Andrea then went and got her 3 sons, John, Paul, and Luke. And if you're watching this because you want to know what happened, but you don't really want to know what happened, don't watch don't just skip this part. So John was 5 years old, Paul was 3 years old, and Luke was only 2 years old, and Andrea drowned them in the bathtub one by one. So she laid all 3 boys out on her bed, and then she went and found her daughter Mary, who was only 6 months old. She then drowned Mary in the bathtub and left her floating in the bathtub while she went to go find her oldest son, who was Noah, and he was 7 years old at this point. So then when Noah came in, he he asked what was wrong with Mary. Like, he was like, "Mummy, what's wrong with Mary? Is she okay?" Like, 7 years old, he has an understanding of what's going on. So she tried to drown him too, but he's old enough to sort of run away and squirm. So he tried to run away and she chased him down and then took him back to the bathtub and drowned him as well. She then went and placed Mary in her brother John's arms on the bed and then left Noah in the bathtub. She then made a 911 call and she asked for police, and then she was sort of offered emergency, and she was like, yeah, send emergency too. Like, it was sort of an afterthought to send an ambulance. She then called Rusty and said, "You need to come home." And he said, "Is something wrong?" And she said, "Yeah." And he was like, "With the children?" She was like, "Yeah." He asked how many. He literally asked how many children had she hurt, or how many children was something wrong with, and she said all of them. And then the police and the ambulance arrived, and then Rusty arrived, and Rusty was denied access to the house. He wasn't allowed in while they were in there, and he lost it. He kind of went ballistic, and he was running around the house trying to knock on all the windows, all the doors, trying to get in the house, trying to catch a glimpse of Andrea, and he was like screaming, "How could you do this? How could you do this?" He was obviously told what had happened, and it was horrible. So Andrea made a formal confession, which took about 17 minutes long, and she was really honest and detailed about what she'd done. She was very forthcoming, and the investigators were just like sick to their stomach that someone could do this so methodically, repeatedly, and then come in and be coherent in like a confession.
Water, what was your intent? What were you about to do?
And the children.
The very next day, Rusty did a press conference, and despite his outrage, literally just the day before, he actually said that he supports Andrea.
I'm supportive of her. It's hard, like I said, because I'm torn. One side of me, blames her because she did it, but the other side of me says, well, she didn't, because that wasn't her, she wasn't in the right frame of mind.
Which a lot of people found really weird. It doesn't really make sense to forgive her within 24 hours. Like, that felt really odd to a lot of people. So Andrea was actually coherent during the confession. She was coherent during all of the trial, although at the trial she was actually medicated, so it was a little bit different. But when she first spoke with her lawyer, she told her lawyers that she wanted to plead guilty because she wanted to be punished for what she had done. She'd been a bad mother and she deserved to be punished for it. But her legal team, they felt like they had a good case to plead insanity, because obviously she had had a very long struggle and battle with mental illness, and they felt like they had a good case here. But the state and majority of everybody else, they kind of disagreed. They felt like Andrea was aware of what she was doing at the time of the murders. They could see that she took very deliberate actions to put herself in a position where she could carry out these murders. Like, she waited until her husband Rusty had gone to work before she ran the bathtub. She knew that if she hadn't, Rusty would have stopped her. So it didn't feel like, to a lot of people, that she was having an episode or an outburst, or this was something done out of impulse. This felt calculated. She even admitted in her confession that she drowned them one by one, so neither one of them could affect each other. And she did it really methodically. Like, she left Noah for last because he was the oldest and he could have caused a big scene. Like, if she had done him first, he might have warned the other kids and started screaming, and it would have created chaos. Whereas she was very, very calculated about how she did this. They could even see that she locked up the family dog, who was normally allowed roam around the house, and they felt like she did this so that the dog couldn't even interfere with this. And in the state of Texas, having a successful insanity plea is like next to impossible. It's like a 1% chance or something very, very low. Don't quote me on that, but it's very, very low chances of being successful with it, because they have very strict guidelines of what qualifies for an insanity plea. And one of the things is you have to prove that they didn't know the difference between right or wrong in that exact moment that the crime was happening, which, judging by all of the points I just made, would be really, really hard to prove. Andrea was assumed to have postpartum psychosis, which is a much more severe form, similar to postpartum depression, except it's psychosis. Similar but different, very, very severe. But the psychosis aspect and the hallucinations, they involve the actual child rather than other things. It actually affects every 1 in 1,000 women, so women who give birth, so it's not all that common, but like it does exist and it's very, very serious. And Andrea was already diagnosed with major depressive disorder, and she'd obviously been treated on numerous occasions for all of these psychosis symptoms, like these hallucinations, like these visions, like these auditory things that she was hearing, but she was never actually diagnosed with postpartum psychosis. But even if she was, unless they could prove that she was having one of these hallucinations or visions during the time of the murders, it doesn't really qualify for an insanity plea. It just didn't in Texas. And while she was locked up awaiting trial, she was given her medication, except now she actually had to take it because like you don't really get a choice in prison, like you get given it and you have to take it. Like, so she was actually taking it on a regular basis at the same time every day, and she was starting to get better. But this didn't help her case. There was actually a lot of lawyers who suggested she never should have been given her medication because it would have been fairer to her for the jury to see her in the same mental state that she was in at the time of the murders rather than after she's been given medication and been treated. But in my opinion, she sounded more crazy when she was recovering than she did at the time of the murders.
If you had not taken their lives, what did you think would happen to them?
I guess they would have continued stumbling.
And where would they end up?
Hell.
Like, obviously the devil's not coming to get you. It made her sound crazier, in my opinion. But because everyone knew she was getting better and because she was very coherent in the way she was speaking it, it wasn't like actually crazy. It was just like, she's a bad person for believing this, if that makes sense. Andrea Yates was found guilty of capital murder for the murder of her 5 children, but she was rejected the death penalty, so she was actually sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years. As for Rusty, he wasn't legally sought after, which pisses me off because I really genuinely feel like he should have been held accountable for leaving her alone with those 5 children on purpose. It was not an accident. It was not like a mistake. He purposely left her there for an hour because he believed in his itty bitty little brain that he was smarter and more professional and knew more about the mental illness and about his wife than all of the psychiatrists and doctors that warned him against it. On top of that, Andrea actually had confided in her psychiatrist that Rusty is the one who wanted more kids, and she went to Rusty and said, look, I am not having any more kids. I can't have any more kids. It's not good for my mental health. My psychiatrist told me I cannot have more kids. No more fucking kids. Like, no more, no more. I don't want them. And you know what he did? Allegedly, according to the psychiatrist, according to Andrea, he just rambled on and on and on about all this religious mumbo jumbo, about how they're supposed to have kids, about how she's a great mother. Like, what are you talking about? You're a fantastic mom. The kids love you. I love you. Everyone loves you. You need to have more kids. And he had sex with her anyway so that she would get pregnant, which is so sad. She came to him and didn't want to have sex anymore because she didn't even want to risk getting pregnant anymore, and he just did it anyway. He continually ignored the recommendations, the advice, the warnings from all of the psychiatrists, all of the psychologists, all of the doctors, all of the nurses, and then he put a woman who was very sick, still hallucinating, not even meant to be on her own, in charge of 5 children, on purpose. Why? And he continued to support her during the trial and had in his mind that she was going to get out, she was going to be fine, she would get off because she was sick, and they would continue their marriage and have more kids. Like, he literally said, it's fine, we'll have more. What the fuck? And in the trials, he successfully shifted all the blame onto poor Dr. Saeed instead, because he was like, well, I'm not a medical professional. I can't have this responsibility. I didn't know any better. Well, you did because everyone told you, but anyway. And then he divorced Andrea after the trial, after she was sentenced, and he remarried, had another kid, and then she divorced him. So I don't know where Rusty is at anymore, but he gets on my nerves. And that is the Andrea Yates case. This is a super, super heavy case. I'm sorry that it's heavy and about children again. I really need to start looking at some other stuff. I've got some good stuff coming, but don't worry, don't worry. Please let me know what you think about this one in the comments down below. I really want to know what you think about Rusty in particular, but also about Andrea and her trial. Do you think that she should have qualified for an insanity plea and, you know, been treated for all of that? Or do you think she deserves to be in prison? What do you think about that? Do you think religion played a part as well in this culty thing she had going on? And yeah, just tell me what you think about the case in the comments down below, or you can head over to my Facebook, which is skyweb with 3 B's, and let me know there. It's also linked in the description to make it easier for you. Be sure to give this video a big thumbs up if you feel like it. I would really appreciate it, and be sure to subscribe so that you can see all my new videos. I post every single Thursday all about true crime, and I would love to have you be a part of it. Make sure you guys are being safe out there. Make sure you don't join any cults. Make sure you never go against your psychiatrist's wishes unless it's like really, really necessarily important. And make sure this case doesn't get to you too much, because I know it's really, really heavy, and the more you think about it, the more it can really get to you. So just try not to let it get to you. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be safe out there. Bye.